I'm dropping an immediate spoiler warning at the beginning of this video because it covers a character very dear to my heart, but if you've been playing Remake and Rebirth of Final Fantasy VII and you haven't played anything else to do with Final Fantasy VII, this may be a bit spoilery for you. I'd argue that it gives a lot of really good context on this specific character, but you can be the judge. Spoilers regardless for this game. Also, this video was originally going to be an entire history of everything that happened leading up to the beginning of Final Fantasy VII. That video may still happen, but I had a sudden change of heart and switched my script around at the last minute, so hopefully you enjoy this as well. But if you would like to see that entire historical timeline, and if it would help you get some context to kind of what's happening in 7 just as a whole, let me know down in the comments below. So I went back and refilmed a lot of this because I realised as I was going through that history video, I was making a lot of mentions of Zack, and he is, probably by quite a long way, one of my favourite characters in all of Final Fantasy. Plus, he kind of shows up in Remake and Rebirth without any real context as to how or why. I believe the first time we see him, right at the end of Remake, he's carrying an unconscious Cloud through the wastelands around Midgar. Why is he doing that? How did he come to be there? Who is he? We're going to go into that a little bit right now. He's important, he's awesome, he's tragic, and he's very, very important to Cloud as it happens. So, with all of that in mind, I think we should get into it. Let's get into it. Where do we first meet Zack Fair? Now, if you've played the original Final Fantasy VII, we only really see bits and pieces of him in the form of flashbacks. And as I mentioned just now, in Remake we see him right at the end, and in Rebirth, for various reasons which haven't even really been revealed to us just yet, we see him in another timeline altogether. But where we really learn the most about him, his backstory and how things came to be, is in a different game called Crisis Core. He's expanded on a lot in Crisis Core, so if you've only played the OG, Remake or Rebirth, I strongly recommend that you also give Crisis Core a try. Admittedly, the gameplay is not the best you've ever tried in your life, and also some of the dialogue is a bit interesting. I don't want to say cringe. Cringe is maybe the wrong word. But it is worth it, trust me. Just for Zack alone, you'll realise that he is the insert of the player in that game. Just a guy trying to figure out what the heck is going on in this crazy world full of theatre kids. Anyway, he was born in 1984 in Gongaga. I should also mention that you'll hear me say a lot of months and dates in this video. You can kind of equate the date system in Final Fantasy VII to our own date system. It works in a similar-ish way. The months are kind of the same, the years are kind of the same. So it takes place on a different planet, Gaia, but they often call it just the planet. Either way. He was born in Gongaga, and as a child, he dreamed of becoming a soldier, as you've maybe gathered most young boys do in this world. He left Gongaga for Midgar in 1997 when he was only 13 years old, and even better, he didn't tell his parents. When he got there, he trained under Soldier First Class Angeal Hewley. And he was pretty enthusiastic about it all. He trained a lot with the virtual reality system that Shinra had built, but there was little improvement over time, and that caused Angeal to pit Zack against Sephiroth for the first time. At this point, Sephiroth was already a legendary hero amongst soldiers in general. And this seemed to help. By October 2000, Zack was already a soldier second class. And he was working under director Lazard Ducericus. I had to read that off my notes because that's the third time I'm trying to say his name. Lazard Ducericus. There we go. You'll notice if you play Crisis Core that Zack always has this air about him of overconfidence, kind of in an easygoing way, but it doesn't do him any favours in the long run. He's often warned about that overconfidence, and he's equally often just defeated in his training. Even with all of that said though, Angeal, who is training him, recommends him for Soldier First Class. And together the two are deployed to Wutai, where they learn that First Class Soldier Genesis has deserted them, taking several second and third class soldiers with him. Who is Genesis? That, I feel, may be another video, but very brief explanation is that he's considered a failed Genova experiment. Also, he recites poetry constantly, including Loveless, which, if you've played Final Fantasy VII, you know what Loveless is, you can find it in the Gold Saucer, but he reads it constantly and he's always quoting it out loud, and the characters get pretty annoyed about that.
My friend, do you fly away now? To a world that abhors you and I?
Shut up!
All that awaits you.
Shut up! I'm warning
is a
you!
somber morrow.
Anyway, along the way to Wutai, Angeal explains to Zack the origin of the Buster Sword on his back. Yes, the Buster Sword, the same Buster Sword that Cloud carries. It didn't originally belong to him, and it didn't originally belong to Zack either. It belonged to Angeal. It was passed down through his family, and he very rarely uses it in battle because he considers that a waste. When they get to Fort Tamblin in Wutai, they come across 9-year-old Yuffie. And if you get the Yuffie date in Final Fantasy VII, she explains that she met a soldier way back when in Wutai. She's referring to Zack. There's a bunch of fighting, and Angeal has to save Zack with the Buster Sword, which is already interesting because he never uses it, and he kind of values Zack's life just above the Buster Sword, so he decides it's time to swing it out and use it to save him. On the way back from their mission, they're attacked by a bunch of clones of Genesis, and Angeal vanishes. Sephiroth saves Zack and concludes that Angeal must have left with Genesis, which obviously is a huge downer for Zack, that being his mentor, his teacher, and someone he trusted. Eventually, Zack is assigned to accompany the Turks, led by Tsung. Their mission is to go to Benora to investigate Genesis's and Angeal's disappearances and whereabouts. Sephiroth doesn't go because he doesn't want any part in all of this because they're his friends. But repeat patterns keep happening. Zack keeps getting attacked, and Angeal keeps being there to save him. After that attack though, the village of Benora was destroyed by Shinra to cover up what had happened there. In April 0001, Zack is finally promoted to Soldier First Class. You can think of 0001 as 2001 in our kind of calendar system. Of course, Genesis just doesn't give up ever, and his army decides to attack Midgar not long after this. During that time, Zack meets Cisne of the Turks, as they're all deployed there together. And while they're out there fighting, both Sephiroth and Zack discover plans for Project G. They also discover that the man responsible for it is Dr. Hollander. What is Project G? Basically, it's a branch of the Genova Project. I'll try and do a TLDR here just to not confuse things, but Genova, the alien, was discovered in the North Crater. Everyone thought it was the remains of a Cetra and named it Genova. And then that project was split into Project S and Project G. And the reason it was called Project G is because of a woman named Jillian who had Genova cells kind of injected into her. Horrible stuff, experimentation, not good. Through their investigations, Zack is finally stopped by Angeal, who sprouts one angelic wing and tells him that he is a monster. Zack refuses to believe it, but Angeal destroys the ground that Zack is standing on, sending him flying into the Sector 5 slums, where he happens to land in a patch of flowers in the Sector 5 slums church. This is where he meets Aerith for the first time, and kind of falls for her, thinking she's an angel of some kind. They eventually decide to go on a date, and he buys her a pink ribbon, which she wears in her hair from that moment on. Of course, Genesis can't let anyone have nice things, so he decides to attack the upper plate, and Zack is sent up there to go and stop him, and that just puts a stop to the date, for then at least. On the way, Angeal appears again, and he makes it clear that he wants to work with Zack. Together they fight Genesis, but once again, both Genesis and Angeal disappear together. All very suspicious. Angeal seems to still have some care in him for Zack, but something keeps pulling him away back to Genesis regardless. On the way to visit Aerith again later on, Zack is stopped by Tsung and sent off on another mission. This time it's the mountain town of Nibelheim, and he makes it clear that they'll have some infantrymen accompanying them, one of those infantrymen being Cloud Strife. The two of them instantly bond and become real close friends, mostly over their background as being country boys from the middle of nowhere. I'll see if I can insert a Gongaga clip right here, because you have to, right? When they get to Nibelheim, they find Dr. Hollander along with Genesis, who is confronting him about his genetic degradation due to being implanted with those Genova cells, and being unable to cure it. This is when he reveals that Project G stands for Jillian, and that Angeal is Jillian's son. It was hoped that he would be the perfect soldier once he was given Genova's cells. This time, Zack fights Genesis and wins, and then he goes to find Angeal, who by this time has fused with several copies of himself. This time, Zack is strong enough, and he defeats Angeal. And as Angeal closes his eyes and is about to pass away, he gives Zack his Buster Sword, telling him that no matter what, he needs to remember his dreams and his honour. Aerith comforts him later on, and the fight against Genesis is presumed to be over since he's been kind of defeated. And so, what do you do when you defeat the bad guy? You go on vacation to Costa del Sol, obviously. When he gets there, Zack finds himself being watched over by Cisne. But in any case, the nice times don't even last that long. Genesis copies keep showing up. Together, they learn that Director Lazard had betrayed Soldier and worked with the copies of Genesis to break Dr. Hollander out of prison where he was being held in Junon. Zack went to stop it, but he was completely unsuccessful, and so Sephiroth sent him back to Midgar to go see Aerith. He returns to find a bunch of monsters released from Hojo's lab, and that a copy of Angeal is protecting Aerith. While he's there, he builds her a flower wagon, and he entrusts Tsung to watch over her, as he's the only one he can depend on to do that safely. After entrusting that to Tsung, he was to be sent to Nibelheim, with Sephiroth, Cloud Strife, and one other infantryman. Knowing that he was going to Nibelheim, he says goodbye to Aerith for what will be the last time. The Nibelheim incident would occur in 0002. The group arrives in Nibelheim, and Tifa guides them up Mount Nibel to the reactor. This is where Zack and Sephiroth find the pods filled with machinids at the reactor, and where Sephiroth learns that he was created as part of the Genova project, causing him to have a mental breakdown. Outside, Cloud is injured while trying to protect Tifa from an attack by Genesis, and when Zack returns, he managed to carry them all outside. Cloud's kind of bummed out because he wishes he could protect them better and wishes that he was a soldier, but Zack reminds him that that's not really a great thing to aspire to, and that being a soldier is like being in a den of monsters. Meanwhile, Sephiroth is hiding in the basement of Shinra Manor, reading all these books and just refusing to be disturbed even when Zack goes to find him. This goes on for a while, until Sephiroth burns down Nibelheim in October that year. He heads to the reactor to find Genova. Tifa is cut down and refuses Zack's help, so he goes ahead and fights Sephiroth himself. and is defeated. That's when Cloud, who is still an infantryman, remember, he's not a soldier, picks up the Buster Sword and stabs Sephiroth while he's unaware, throwing him into the life stream. They're all unconscious for a while, but Tifa is eventually rescued by her martial arts master, Zangan. The other two aren't so lucky. They are discovered by Professor Hojo, and they are taken to be experimented on. This experiment would be the Jenova reunion theory, where both of them are injected with Jenova cells. Over 4 years, Zack is experimented on. And Hojo's project is actually deemed a failure due to Zack's strong tolerance of the Jenova cells, which in turn is thanks to his soldier training. Cloud, on the other hand, has the opposite problem. He has a lack of tolerance with absolutely zero soldier training, and he starts to suffer from toxicosis. Zack finally awakens from all his experimentation in December 0006, and he finds Cloud in a vegetative state. So he grabs Mako-poisoned Cloud and carries him out of Shinra Manor. At this point, as they escape, they are fugitives wanted by Shinra, and Zack is warned that an entire battalion is being sent after him. By the time they get out, Nibelheim has actually been rebuilt, and on the way, they come across Cissnei again. Her orders are to take them in, but she lets them escape. They actually mean to escape to Gongaga, but Cissnei warns them against it because that's exactly where Shinra is going to look for them. She also tells Zack that she spoke to his parents and that they know that he's well. They come across some Genesis copies while they're escaping, looking for Cloud along with Dr. Hollander, since they believe he has Jenova cells from Sephiroth that could cure their cellular degradation. Zack defends Cloud and kills Hollander once and for all alongside Director Lazard, who at this point had kind of become an Angeal copy. In any case, he's remorseful for his past actions, and he wants to save the world. So the three of them, Zack, Cloud, and Lazard, head to Benora and they defeat Genesis for what feels like the millionth time. Zack also eats a Benora apple just to complete Genesis's dream of reenacting Loveless, so I guess he can just be at peace at that point. The last remaining Angeal copy arrives, delivering a letter from Aerith, and Zack finally realizes that it's been 4 years. Of course, he wants to return to Midgar for her, so he picks up the vegetable Cloud, leaves Genesis and Lazard behind, and travels off to Midgar. On the way, Zack has plans for him and Cloud to become mercenary bros together, and he's just chatting away about it, but first he kind of considers whether Aerith's mother could take care of Cloud just while he comes back to himself. Meanwhile, the battalion are deployed against Zack, and Sung orders the Turks to try and collect him first, hoping to save his life and deliver the rest of the 88 letters that Aerith has written to him in the meantime. Finally, at the end of September 0007, they reach Midgar and find that Shinra army is waiting for them. The Turks weren't able to get to them first. Zack puts up a very brave fight, a heartbreaking fight, actually. I was in floods of tears when I played it. But he is gunned down by Shinra, and Cloud is left alone on the commander's orders. Zack had no chance against the battalion, and he dies, but not before telling Cloud to say hi to Aerith for him. And so he goes to join Angeal. But the most important question he asks before he passes is whether he did enough to be a hero. The combined trauma of the Nibelheim incident, Mako poisoning, and witnessing Zack's death was too much for Cloud's mind. Aided by the Jenova cells in his body, his mind is warped and he adopts elements of Zack's memories and persona, combining them with his own to make an idealized image of himself. With nothing else for it, he takes Zack's Buster Sword and heads towards Midgar. And that leads us directly into the events of Final Fantasy VII as we know it. With Remake and Rebirth, though, we're seeing an entirely different timeline, separate to the main one, where Zack didn't die, which frankly I'm not mad about. But where are we going with all this? Will this go some way to helping Cloud regain his own memories and his own personality? Will Zack be able to reunite with Aerith one way or another? I really, really hope so. I love those two. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, whether you've learned something new about Zack today, whether you're curious about how this is all going to turn out in the remake, and what you thought of him in Crisis Core as a whole, as a character. I'd really be interested to find out. As always, I really appreciate you hanging out with me for a little while, learning some lore, finding out something new, enjoying some information about the Final Fantasy world. Please don't hesitate to leave a like if you enjoyed this and subscribe if you haven't already. You know, as always, it means the world to me. Look out for more Final Fantasy coming up in the future. I'm really enjoying digging into all this and making videos based on this old series that goes back decades and all the amazing storytelling that goes with it. But for now, have a great rest of your day wherever you might be in the world, and I'll see you in the next video.